We're studying the reversionist. It's the born again believer who has fallen backwards down the spiritual mountain. He is no longer progressing, but he is regressing. He is born again, headed to heaven, can't lose his salvation, but his spiritual growth is in reverse, if you will. A lot of people call it backslidden. The Bible calls it stiff-necked. And so we're studying the Christian who is in a faraway land. He's a prodigal. And what happens when you're in a faraway land? Well, I don't know if have you ever seen a kid that you told now, don't do that. I'm fixing to leave the room, but don't touch that. Okay? Do whatever you want, just don't touch that. And what happens when you leave the room? You're going to look around. You're going to go touch it. Well, the believer in reversionism does what God tells them not to do. And the passage that we're studying is one of those passages. I've got the corrected translation here that I want to go ahead and share with you. Okay, so here's a better translation of Ephesians 4:19. Who, that is, category reversionist, while having become callous, that means they've got scar tissue on their soul, have betrayed themselves to promiscuous debauchery. That means all kinds of sexual reversionism, resulting in the practice of every kind of immorality in the sphere of insatiable lust. And so we began to look at the doctrine of sex because the passage that we are dealing with deals with the reversionist and his sex life. And I'm not going to review our introduction. I just want to review the points that we covered last week. And then I want to build off of that. So marriage is the right sphere for the sex life. And we begin to look at three areas of intimacy in marriage. We saw the physical intimacy, it's a coalescence of bodies in the sexual relationship. The compatibility intimacy, it's the coalescence of souls through integrity or virtue, which establishes true love. And then rapport intimacy is the coalescence of spiritual lives of the husband and wife, use and growth in the divine dynasphere as the normal function in the daily life. And obviously, unless you're both studying together, listening to tapes together, studying some form of Bible doctrine together, you'll never have point three. And it's not very often that you actually have a marriage where both people understand the spiritual life, understand the bottom circle, understand operating clean from the priesthood. Not very often does it happen. But Bible doctrine is the key. And so therefore, when you get ready to get married, you ought to be interviewing that person who may or may not be the right one to see what they think of Bible doctrine. And the truth is, they may not have ever listened to the Colonel. They may not have ever heard Joe Griffin. They may not have ever studied categorical doctrine. The question is, are they positive to that type of thing? Because if they're positive, they can grow, and you know how fast somebody can grow very quickly. So that's the kind of questions that you're asking while you're dating, and dating is legitimate because, in fact, it is a interview to see if this person is possibly the right person or possibly not. And so if you know they're not, that's when you move on and you go somewhere different. Point two, God invented marriage to be a special relationship of unity, intimacy, and privacy between one adult man and one adult woman. And so, as we've told you, the purpose of rearing children is to mature their soul to match their rapidly maturing bodies. What we've got right now is a generation of mature bodies and baby souls. And when you have that combination, it's a very dangerous generation. I was out jogging yesterday and I came over Henderson Hill and I heard the tribal beat. I was, what is going on up here? And then not only was there a tribal beat, but the language of the music was in Spanish. And it was Spanish disco rap, I don't know, something. They had it playing on a loudspeaker over the Henderson campus. And the kids were moving in. I figured out it was move-in day. And there's nothing like a socialist professor proclaiming the righteousness of the metric system and the tribal beat to bring out a new crop of communists in America. And if you didn't know it, our education system is devised to produce good little communists. And, when I tell somebody, when I ask them, well, do you know where the origin of the metric system is? Because all the teachers in school, they'll tell you that the fractional, the imperial system is antiquated. It's not related to anything square or round. And the metric system is the new system that the world is using to progress. And every person that comes out of school now will tell you the metric system is superior to the imperial system. And I say, well, who won World War I, the imperial system or the metric system? Are you speaking German or English? Well, they have to say, well, the imperial system. Who won World War II? Who won it? The imperial system or the metric system? It was one against the other. Who won it? The fractional imperial system won. Who put the man on the moon using the imperial fractional system? Was it the metric world or was it our world? Who did it? Do you know where the metric system came from? Do you even know where it came from? During the French Revolution, the anti-biblical leftists said we're going to do away with everything from the Bible. And instead of having 7 days a week, do you know what they did? They created 10. And they said, instead of using the Bible as a measurement system, we're going to create our own. We're going to wipe out everything from the Bible. And guess what they did? They even created a calendar. All their measurements were in tens. And it was anti-God. You didn't know it. The metric system is evil from its core and beginning. And every one of these kids are getting taught in school that it's bad. They got no pastor to tell them any different. You need an adult soul to match your rapidly maturing body. Otherwise, you're cannon fodder for the next generation. Hear me? So God invented marriage to be a special relationship of unity, intimacy, and privacy between adults. And you may have an adult body, but guess what? You don't have an adult soul to go with it. You're not going to enjoy and you're going to abuse the situation. It'll never be right. Point 3, marriage can be illustrated by the concept of the castle. We began to build the castle by saying that Jesus Christ is its foundation, that his thinking is given to us in Bible doctrine. The solution to all marital problems is located in the content of doctrine. This means that marital problems are not solved by changing spouses, but by changing yourself. It also means that marital problems are not solved by counseling, by seeking self-justification, by unloading your problems on others, or other systems involving others in your marriage. The exception is when a spouse needs medical attention or psychiatric help. Just as Bible doctrine circulating in the 7 compartments of the stream of consciousness is the foundation in marriage, so personal love inside the integrity envelope is the superstructure of the castle. So if you're going to build a big building, you got to think about, what are you going to do? You're going to pour your foundation. Well, that's Bible doctrine, the thinking of Christ. And then you're going to start standing up that rebar. You're going to build a superstructure. You're going to go way up. And inside those walls, we're going to talk about what is the superstructure? What are the walls of that castle? What's going to take it up? Personal love is the superstructure. So if you look at the rebar itself, you would think about personal love. Now, personal love in marriage, remember that you've got to have both flavors. You've got to have phileo love, that's compatibility love, right man, right woman love. But you've also got to have that virtue love, agape love, because everybody doesn't have a good day every day. And there will be moments, usually in every day, where you have to flip the switch from phileo to agape. And that's what makes a wonderful marriage. And that's what makes the correct environment for raising children, because you don't want to raise kids in a war zone in the home. You've got to be able to stay calm, cool, and collected and resolve your problems outside of the child's area. So these castle walls provide unity, privacy, intimacy, love, affection, virtue, and happiness. We're going to talk about the different walls that go in there. The superstructure is love, rebar of the building. And then on these walls, we're going to pour, we're going to build, and we're going to have different layers to that wall, which build our castle. What are the purpose of these walls? Continued. Since the wife or the woman is a responder, that means the male provides aggressive love and the wife responds to them. Those invisible walls protect her from any outside encroachment in the form of seduction, distraction, transference of affection, and admiration to someone other than her husband. This does not imply social withdrawal from friends, peers, or society in general. nor does it imply aversion to the conformity to the conventional standards of social behavior. So the idea is that the male provides aggressive love towards his right woman, and she responds to that aggressive love. Now, females, you have to recognize the sacrifice of the male. Most of his sacrifice towards his wife and his family is going to be in his professional life, where he is grinding it out for a living. And that is a big sacrifice on the part of most males, where he is subjecting himself to the rigors of a professional life, whatever that is. And so don't discount, ladies, the sacrifice of your men out there in the professional life. And remember that it is a big part of his aggressive love towards you. It's where he's going to end up spending most of his time anyway. And then men, don't forget that your wife is supposed to be a responder, and she is miserable when she has to take the part of the aggressor. And so it is your job to be the aggressor in the love situation, and the wife is the responder, and she becomes miserable when she has to take the lead. Point 3, marriage is a special relationship, system of intimacy, privacy, virtue, love, and happiness, in which the husband protects his wife as a responder through the fulfillment, through the first divine law of marriage. Husband, love your wives. Now, this doesn't mean buy them chocolates and flowers. And you'll see in the verse, it goes ahead and it tells what kind of love is in view here. It says, just as Christ also loved the church. In other words, he saw the dispensation of the mystery and he said, I am going to provide for them everything they need to prosper, and gave himself as a substitute for her. In other words, he sacrificed on her behalf. And so, males, this is a sacrificial type of love where you are going to forego a lot of your visions and dreams and whatever of the future, so that you may, in fact, provide a prosperous life for a wife. Neither the husband or the wife should ever go outside and complain about the other spouse. And so it's always bad when you go out and talk about how bad or good your wife is, or how bad or good your husband is. You should resolve those things with doctrine. And I would tell you, if you're having marital problems, the best thing you could do is sit at the kitchen table with the tape player and listen to the marriage tapes. Get Ralph Braun's categorical notebook out and read through the whole marriage section. Man, there's a big section in there on marriage. Wonderful. Figure out how to study together, and before you know it, you'll both have your toes steamrolled multiple times. No, neither one of you will be right every time. You'll both have aching toes from getting steamrolled. That's how it works, and that's how you get a marriage back on course. So don't go complaining to other people about how bad your mate is. Sit down and study the Bible together. This does not mean being asocial or antisocial. It indicates a divine grace provision for one man and one woman, which is different from all other human relationships, including relationship with father and mother. Another part of a wall of our superstructure is sexuality itself. It is the monopoly of marriage. So you wouldn't think of it as being a wall of protection, but it is a wall of protection in marriage. How so? Let's look at some points. Sex is the invisible castle walls that isolate the husband and wife from all other persons in their periphery. The sexual relationship in marriage is the invisible walls of the castle, which constitute unity, privacy, intimacy, love, affection, virtue, and happiness of divine institution number 2, marriage. So the idea is that private life that only belongs to you and your spouse. It really should be private too. Don't kiss and tell. And that that becomes a layer of the castle wall that you and your spouse share together, and that nobody else is involved in, and that it is between thee and he, and it in fact is an insulation against the rest of the world, because that's a private life, and it is certainly a wonderful part of a private life. Point 2, sex portrays the beauty of interdependence in marriage, just as Bible doctrine emphasizes the believer's total dependence on God and his grace policy. See, God makes love to us through Bible doctrine. He's chasing us down with his aggressive love. We respond to that by taking the doctrine into our souls and having it ready for application in our daily life experience. So, the same way in marriage, you rely on one another. Interdependence. Point 3, invisible walls of protection. Sex is a return to Eden when the coalescence of bodies is accompanied by the coalescence of souls. See, now you have some doctrine. The coalescence of bodies is a vacation from the first 2 laws of marriage. Man's authority over the woman is set aside in sex. The woman's obedience to the man is set aside in sex. Each spouse has the authority over the other person's body. Each can initiate in sex and the other can respond. This gives both a vacation back to the Garden of Eden. So it's a vacation from the realities of life and the real world where everything is harsh and authority is the order of the day. A return to Eden. So the first layer of the castle walls we saw was sex. It protects the marriage from the outside world. It's a completely private arrangement. The second is the integrity envelope. When we're talking about spiritual integrity, the envelope itself is a level of integrity. It provides the coalescence of souls to accompany the coalescence of bodies. It protects the woman as a responder to one man in marriage. The invisible wall created by sexual intimacy not only establishes an interdependence between husband and wife, but adds a fantastic interaction by which spirituality and sexuality combine to form the most fantastic relationship in life. And as we saw last week, the most wonderful marriage is where the right man and the right woman view themselves as Adam and Eve in the garden. And as we saw the story of Adam, no helpmeet was found for him, even though he interviewed every created thing. He was alone. He was by himself. He was lonely. He was without the right person in his life. And then Jesus Christ, what did he do? He snatched the rib out like that, violently, took it out, and he built a woman. And Adam exclaimed, finally, bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh, I shall call her woman. And violently they came back together. And so when you see your marriage as the fact that there's only two humans on the earth that were made for one another, you'll have a whole lot easier time, because anybody else is going to be just like they were in kindergarten. Well, this is not working out. I'm going to look for a new one. And they continue the search. So that's not the correct idea in marriage as God would have it. It's supposedly till death do us part as far as the Bible is concerned. Let's look at two categories of sex operational in history. We're going to see some things that go haywire with the system now. Two different categories of sex that are operating in human history. First is legitimate, which God invented for the invisible walls of marriage, inside the castle. The second is illegitimate. And this deals with our verse, every sexual immorality, which is man's sinful and evil distortion of what God has so graciously provided. Castle of marriage has invisible walls which isolate husband and wife in marriage and cause their relationship to be unique. Illegitimate sex destroys the castle walls of marriage. As said in 1 Corinthians 7:2, but because of every kind of unlawful sex, let each man have his own wife, and let each woman have her own husband. And while now marriage and the idea of correct sex is outdated, the human race is the same as when God created Adam and Eve, and it hasn't changed any. And he set forth principles of morality, and they haven't changed. And it's only the modern thinking of the reversionist that is the same all along the way. So what are the sexual sins? 5 categories of them. Sex outside of marriage is always classified as sin with Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, 10 through 23, Numbers 5, 12 through 13, Deuteronomy 5, 22 through 23. What are those 5 categories? First is adultery, voluntary sexual intercourse of a married person with someone other than his wife or someone other than her husband. And the Mosaic Law had a penalty for adulterators. It was death. We wouldn't have too many people left who did it now. And so, thank goodness, the law is behind us. And while it does teach us morality, we're no longer functioning under the Mosaic Law. Fornication, voluntary sexual intercourse between two unmarried persons or two persons not married to each other, generally known as sex before marriage. And while it is a sin, it is not as bad as some other sins. I'll tell you some sins that are much worse than fornication. Self-righteousness is much worse. And you take somebody who has never fornicated and look at the amount of self-righteousness they direct towards someone who has. And if our young people just flow with the waves of the world, they're going to get into fornication. The whole world's promoting it. I don't know if you've listened to any of the music, but the big push in music is fornication and crime. And it's in the world, friend, and our kids are getting swept away by the world, and very few, in fact, adhere to the concepts of the Bible. And so, while fornication is a sin, and it's bad because it's sinning against your right man or your right woman who you'll eventually get married to, and you may even build up enough scar tissue in your soul where you can't even recognize them when they show up, it's not nearly as bad as self-righteous judgment. Goody two-shoes, snooty, holier than thou, religiosity. All of these sins are much more terrible than fornication. And while fornication can leave a scar on the soul because of now this person has a guilt complex because they have fallen off the wagon, if you will, now they have to deal with that. There are some worse sins than that. What are some sexual sins of degeneracy? Homosexuality, voluntary sexual intercourse directed towards a person of the same sex. Bestiality, which is a sexual relationship between a human being and an animal. Necrophilia, which is an erotic attraction to a corpse. And then there are sexual sins of crime. Rape, force a person to have intercourse. And the Bible also had a death sentence for rapists. I like that. Obviously, you had to have 3 witnesses. So the idea is that we don't get an innocent person, because there may be some female that was jousted, and she said, "Well, I'll get you back. He raped me." So you had the Bible is plain that, look, we don't want to prosecute anybody who's innocent. Rape was a crime that was punishable by death, and I believe that we should go back to it. Incest, which is a sexual intercourse between parents and children, and this my opinion, should also be punished by death, and painful death. Will children are to be protected above all in this world. They should be able to retain their innocence, and this is one of the ways that a child's soul is murdered. You read in Matthew 18, you will see that Jesus says these children should be protected above everything that there is on this earth, for their fathers are constantly appearing. Their angels are constantly appearing before my Father in heaven. It would be better, if you are going to sin against a child, it would be better for you to cut your hand off, to gouge your eye out, to bury yourself with a millstone strapped around your neck at sea, than to sin against even one little child. So sins against children, especially the sexual type, are terrible. And the tragedy is that children who have been abused in this type of way many times do not get over it, and in fact produce another generation of sexual abuse. They have seen no justice. Seen no justice. And what a child needs to see is that their perpetrator has been convicted, sentenced, and executed. That's where that sin will stop. As long as you have no justice, it will be perpetuated in history. And if you don't believe me, you study about the three hells of Islam. And the young women in Africa who are exposed to this kind of Islam, they have their genitalia mutilated and sewn shut at an early age. Then, when they are married, they have it cut open to an extent. And then when they have a child, is the third hell. And mothers do this to their daughters because it was done to them. The cycles of abuse continue throughout history until a generation sees justice. Pederasty is a sexual relationship between two males, one of whom is a minor. If you don't know anything about this, our soldiers in Afghanistan witness this every Thursday. The men of the town would take the young boys to the mountain. And if you ask them, are you homosexual? They would say no. But every Thursday they would abuse the young men in their villages. The cycles of abuse continue even today because it was never righted. Our government told our soldiers, do not speak of it. And of course, our young men wanted to just do away with this altogether, but their population would have been decimated because it is so commonplace in Afghanistan. Well, we'll stop right there and let's take a break for at least 5 minutes, and we will come right back to our doctrine. Critic of the thoughts and intents of the heart. All Scripture is God-breathed and is profitable for doctrine, for reproof, for correction, for instruction in righteousness, that the man of God might be matured, thoroughly furnished unto all good works. Study to show thyself an approved workman unto God, who needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. We're looking at the doctrine of sex. We're looking at the sexual sins of crime, prostitution, which is the practice of engaging in sexual intercourse for money. You say, well, that's not too common. It will be. When you find out that America is headed for war, then you find out that United Nations peacekeeping forces will move in, and all the armies of the world will be more than happy to send peacekeeping forces to regulate all of the wild Americans that are here. And when you find out when that happens, what happens? Drug cartel type activity and prostitution go through the roof. And all the young women of your nation will be sold for sex slaves. And that's exactly how it happens all over the world. And people think, well, we need to have a war here. Who suffers in war? Women and children, specifically females. And we're headed for it. People don't realize the horrors that await. And it's not the Democrats' fault. It's not the liberals' fault. It's not the communists' fault. It is the fault of Christians who refuse to add themselves to the pivot. And as long as you are not studying Bible doctrine, it will be your fault that these things happen. And then finally, pandering, which is the function of a pimp, a go-between who profits from the vices of others related to illicit sexual intercourse. In modern day, we know it as human trafficking. And all of these people who are into human trafficking should be publicly executed, much like they did in the European era, where they would pull your guts out before you and then stretch you out and do all of these cruel and unusual things to kill you very slowly. This human trafficking issue that we have in America should not exist. It should not exist at all. We're going to have to get rid of it. We want to continue to protect our young people. Okay, point 5. The sexual sins that are related to evil includes phallic cult, demonism, and demon cults related to sex. You say, well, that's not too common nowadays. Aha, yes, it is, because when you study these ideas, they're all related to one word that is used in the Bible that was related to these categories. Pharmakeia. And even in biblical times, the adherents to the phallic cult, the adherents to demonism, the adherent to demon cults were all under the influence of drugs. And the Bible uses the term pharmakeia, which is where we get pharmacy. So that the adherents would take whatever drugs or alcohol, which was much different back then, to produce a trance. And that would initiate their desire to produce these phallic cult activities, demonism, and demon cults. And it got so horrid that the adherents to the phallic cult would sacrifice even their own children to demons in these trances. And so it was a tragic thing, but our children are being sacrificed to even today. If you look at how many parents are being um, disqualified from parenting and their children taken away and put into public systems of keep, you would find out that even today, children are being sacrificed. And children belong in a home with two parents, loving parents, who are sane and sober. So these sexual sins are still going on. Marriage is built on the principle of Bible doctrine and consummated in sexual relationship between husband and wife. And so if you have the tenets of truth from the Bible, you can function properly in your marriage and in your sex life. Marriage must have isolation from parents and society in general under the concept of intimacy, privacy, virtue, love, happiness, and unity. The isolation is the invisible walls of the castle, which we call sex. Obviously, a marriage is going to function the best if you have your own residence, where these things can be very private and doesn't work very well in any other way. Point 4, sex portrays the interdependence of the husband and wife in marriage, the unique unity between one man and one woman. The Bible goes on and says, "For your body is not your own, it's your mate's." Sex in marriage is described under the quote, "one flesh" in Genesis 2:24 and Ephesians 5:31. Hence, one flesh describes the invisible walls of the castle. Ephesians 5:31, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and he shall have sex with his wife. They two shall be one flesh." And there's a very hard man to be married to, and that is one who still wants his mama. And be careful, gentlemen, because it says we should leave our parents and be glued to our spouse. The word also means glued. So marriage is a state of independence from all previous relationships in life. This does not isolate the husband and wife from their parents, but it does mean that parents have no right to interfere in the lives of their adult children. God ordained the principle of separation from parents in the Garden of Eden before parents existed. Marriage came first. Therefore, marriage must be separated from parents and all other forms of society under the concept of unity, privacy, intimacy, virtue, and equality. Genesis 2:24 is quoted in Matthew 19:5, Mark 10:7, 1 Corinthians 6:16, and Ephesians 5:31. We're going to get to Ephesians 5:31. That's a long way into the chapter. That's liable to be at least a year and a half, maybe two from now. I like this point, and this is maybe where we'll finish out the doctrine of sex. What are the 7 reasons God gave us sex? Sex is the monopoly of marriage. In other words, inside that circle, it was invented by God for 7 reasons. And it's not what you think. What are the 7 reasons God gave us sex? The interdependence. The fact that you have to rely on somebody else. See, God doesn't want you to be an island. And the fact that you have to have the coalescence of souls, that you're relying on somebody else, interdependence. is portrayed by sex. A lot of men who are get-it-doners learn how to work alone. When I built my shop, I built all kinds of contraptions to be able to work alone. I built the ceiling in my shop. Inside was 30-foot spans of corrugated metal. And I ordered the metal. I said, I'm going to have a galvalume ceiling in my shop. It's going to be shiny. It's going to reflect the light. I'm going to be able to see what I'm working on. Because when you're doing racing engines, it's like surgery. You got to be able to see what you do. And I got that metal, and they delivered it off a truck. And I said, okay, how am I going to get this in the ceiling of my shop now? One man with a 30-foot long piece of metal trying to put a screw in it or overhead nail it while holding it up is just not going to work. How am I going to do it? So I built me a jig, and it had hinges that had boards, had hinges that went up into the corners, and I would drag the metal up on that jig, and then I would push the jig up, and I stood a board up under it where it held the metal up against the bottom of the truss. And I could go down through there and just put screws in there real nice and relaxed. And then I'd go to the other side, and I'd pull up my jig and push it up against the bottom of and then I didn't have to rely on anybody. I didn't have to say, hey, get that square. Hey, make sure that's flat. Hey, make sure all of these pieces of metal are going to run even across the building. I don't want it overhanging. I don't want it unsquare. It was all on me. You learn how to work by yourself as a get-it-doner. Not in marriage. It don't work that way. You have to depend on your right person. Interdependency. You can't be a go-it-aloner. And that's what, God says, I'm going to teach you that you need help, help me, that you are going to have to get along with someone else. Interdependence. So that's the first reason. God wants to teach you how to get along with other people, and specifically your mate. Rely on one another. The unity of marriage is portrayed by sex. And that verse in Ephesians 5:31, it says, leave your father and mother and be glued together, joined together as one flesh. And that person that you share the sexual relationship with, you will know in intimacy more than you know any other member of the human race. And it is a form of unity. Thirdly, the equality of marriage is portrayed by sex. And while, marriage is, in every other realm of marriage, the male is the authority. He owns at least 51% of the stock. The Bible says that the male should take the bullets. The male should beat down the criminals. The male should be the protector, the one who blocks the ravishing world away from his mate. The male has the testosterone. The Bible says the woman is the weaker species. She has hormones. And that the male is in the authority in the situation and that he calls the shots. But none of that exists when it comes down to sex. Because both have 100% authority. Equality. So the third idea is equality. The fourth idea is the privacy and the intimacy of marriage is portrayed by sex. And this means that what goes on behind closed doors should stay behind the closed doors, and that you shouldn't kiss and tell even if you're married, and the fact that Whatever is okay between you and your mate in sex is okay before God. There is no illegal activity as far as that goes between the two people, and that is why it is totally private and should remain that way. So, privacy. Fifthly, the virtue of marriage. That means thoughtfulness, tenderness, self control, and the virtue, love of the husband performing the sex acts is portrayed by marriage. In other words, it's something that you are not just out for yourself for. If you're a male, remember that you are trying to cultivate a response from your right female, and that is through aggressive love making with thoughtfulness for the other person. Sixthly, the recreation of marriage occurs by sex. And while you may enjoy all kinds of activities, there is nothing like a vacation from the world, if you will, in sex. And then finally, and the last reason, and what most people put as the first reason, the procreation of the human race. You can have babies. But remember that Adam and Eve was giving the first wedding gift before baby making was even possible. So there's the 7 reasons God gave the human race sex. Remember that he says inside of marriage is the right place for sex to happen. And what we're studying is the reversionist in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 19. We want to review our verse and then we'll be dismissed this morning. Who, that is category reversionist, while having become callous, that means they've got scar tissue over their soul, their norms and standards have changed to the world, have betrayed themselves unto promiscuous debauchery. That means they're in sexual reversionism, resulting in the practice of every kind of immorality in the sphere of insatiable lust. Well, I want to thank you for your attention and attendance as we study the doctrine of sex. We're going to get to the doctrine of marriage when we get to Ephesians chapter 5. So if you want to hear more from this area, you just have to hang around for another 6, 8 months or a year. We'll get there.